Just on the nurses, first, I just want to ask you, how much are we losing per day with having the nurses not working and consultants idle and theatres lying idle because the nurses aren't there? How much you would know as Minister for Finance?
I don't have that information with me today.
But you said the financial consequence, that you are responsible for financial consequences. I think it's hugely important that we know what the financial consequences of each day that the nurses are out on strike are for all of us, because at the end of the day we're going to end up paying for it.
Yeah, and I'm sure, Senator, that's something that we would be able to calculate for you, and I can commit to doing that.
Yeah, I find it surprising that you don't have it at the top of your head. Now, when you're talking about the public service stability agreement, clause 3 of that agreement allows for government action on for specific purposes. So we're in a recruitment and retention crisis, obviously, within the health service. Would that clause not allow you to sit down and at least talk about pay with nurses?
But I think it is the provision of that clause that has allowed us to make the recommendations that we have in relation to the additional allowances that were recommended by the Public Service Pay Commission that I've said that I'm already going to do. The challenge that we have in relation to pay, there is a legal issue in relation to what will be the legal basis for changing wage rates, number one. But the bigger issue that we would face is the economic consequences of doing that, Senator, for the reasons that I've outlined already.
Yeah,
and I don't want that everybody else would have to say.
Yeah.
No,
but when you take pay
I'm just
off the
answering, repeating a key answer to your question.
But when you take pay off the table, you see, you have the situation with nurses where they have to build up time, and they build up time in lieu because they cannot get out, because there aren't sufficient staffing there for them to be released, and they end up having maybe a number of hours each and every week that they cannot take, so that they're working for free. So they are subsidising the health service, if you like, above and beyond their 39 hours. Surely that's in relation to pay, that's connected to the pay issue, and that links into the recruitment and retention crisis that we're trying to address.
Yes, you're correct. The number of hours that people do or do not work, of course, then does feed in to the effect that pay policy can have on anybody. That's correct. In relation to the assertion that you made there about recruitment and retention and the description that you have of it there as a crisis, I would go back to the learnings and conclusions of the Public Service Pay Commission report, which I accept, that said we do not have a generalised recruitment and retention difficulty, but it acknowledged that we do have challenges within some sectors and within some hospitals. And that's why we have made, and I've accepted, the recommendations in relation to specific allowances.
I'm not going to spend further time on that, but you know it needs to be sorted sooner rather than later. And I think the committee here really would need to know the daily figure for what the financial consequences of the nurses' strike is. Now, just going on to the children's hospital situation, I think the reason why people are so angry is that it's one in a whole line of procurement failures, and people have lost confidence in those, including yourself, who are managing the procurement process and continue using the procurement model that has led us to so many failures. Some of those failures are like the whole Carillion situation that we have here, that we examined within the committee here, the national broadband situation, the jobs path situation that's been discussed in the Dáil later on this evening, where we have spent around 100 million on private companies that were engaged, that we never saw what the contracts were, that led them to be able to bring back thousands of vulnerable job seekers again and again and get repaid for them, costing citizens, each job over €3,000. It's all of these things put together that I certainly don't have confidence in the procurement processes. And I wonder how much more is happening beyond what we've even had sight of, how much more money is being wasted in this country. And then we compare that to the procurement rules for the smaller community organisations, the rural affairs organisations, the local authorities, where they cannot buy a packet of biscuits without going through a rigid procurement process. So I just want to ask you, firstly, what would you do different in terms of the National Children's Hospital if we were 18 months out from now, or 12 months before now? What would you do different as the person where the buck stops? And will you change the procurement models that are being used because they aren't serving us?
So I disagree, Senator, with the claim that you have regarding our general procurement policies not working. I think where we may differ is I don't think you envisage a role for the private sector at all in delivering projects, but I do. I believe the tendering projects that we have used that have worked for much of the time across schools, primary care centres, road projects, involve the state tendering for best value and then using its resources to deliver projects. And while I accept we have, and I've acknowledged, a great difficulty in relation to where we are with this phase of the National Children's Hospital, I can point to many other projects that have been delivered through use of the private sector that have worked. In relation to the National Children's Hospital and key learnings that I've had in relation to it, for me, one of the key ones is the fact that if we set a project prices at a particular point in the economic cycle, in other words, when it costs a certain amount to deliver an actual project, we need to be more aware than as we complete the actual tendering process at the end of it, maybe after a number of years have elapsed, that the variance between what we thought it would cost then and what it will actually end up costing can be really, really big. And I think the degree of cost inflation that has developed in this project is something that will have consequences for other projects that we look to do in the future.
Yeah. Do you think that we're granting projects or we're granting tenders to bodies and to companies who are purposely undercutting the price? So they're going in with a much lower price, knowing that they can, because there doesn't seem to be the management structures there, that they can add on and add on and add on. Are we not leaving ourselves open as well for others who have tendered at another price could come back and say, well, actually, my tender price was much lower than the one that you've ended up paying? Would there not be a legal situation there?
No, I think we actually make projects and make tenders available to companies who are able to deliver them in best value. And value has two different elements. It has what's the price and what's the quality of the work that they're going to do. I guess the challenge that we have, Deputy, is that if, when procurement processes are reviewed, and if it turned out that an organisation was doing a project or making a project available to a company, and they were not the cheapest bidder, questions will be raised then regarding could we have secured the project at a lower price. So for those reasons, yes, I think if you're coming in at a lower tender price for a project, the probability is that you're going to secure that project. But I know when departments are making final decisions on matters, they take account of other factors apart from the exact price.
Yeah, I just think that the matrix that they're using is obviously not. Do you not think that we're losing money, we're wasting money hand over fist with a lot of these projects? And I take your point about value and price, and we certainly all know the difference between it. But there doesn't seem to be any controls in place. That's one of the biggest problems. And the other problem is that people can go in, or companies can go in and give any price that they want, get in the lowest price, and then add on whatever they want after that as other costs.
Well, for the vast majority of other projects that we do, there are controls in place that work. But of course, we spend little time debating projects that are needed in communities that come in on time and come in on budget. And I understand why those projects don't get the kind of scrutiny that a project that has this kind of difficulty deservedly does. Do I believe we have situations of mass waste across the different projects that we're doing. I don't, Senator. I believe those who are involved in making decisions on projects tend to and want to find the most effective use of taxpayers' money. But I think an issue that we are now encountering is that for some of our very, very biggest projects, the kind of cost inflation that is now being faced is higher than was anticipated when the decision was made to go ahead with some projects in the first place.
I'll finish with that. I honestly, personally, don't think that the capacity is there to deliver the projects, some of the projects that I've mentioned there, or that the will is there to deliver them, to give real value for money for people. You cannot tell me that we're talking even about jobs, Pat, and I think you may have been involved in that yourself. I think Leo Varadkar was. I think he was the minister at the time in charge. And I raised it with him, actually, before he was Taoiseach, around the jobs path and the waste of money there, where we're paying the LES public funded, and then we bring in private companies and we pay them 100 million. But we will be examining that further under another forum. I know we're here to discuss Brexit. And I want to ask you around Brexit, have the government formally requested that the Globalisation Fund be adapted? Because, as you said yourself, and I think we all agree on one thing, that we're in very exceptional circumstances, so that would allow for us to be able to, that the Globalisation Fund could be used to address some of the problems that companies are going to meet.
So the access to the Globalisation Fund is a policy area for the Minister for Business, Enterprise and Innovation. But I know she has had wide-ranging discussions with the Commission about the different kinds of supports that might be needed.
Has she made a formal request, or has the government made a formal request for that to be done? I'll tell you what I'm concerned about is that the gap between, whether it's a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit, the gap between the 29th of March or 28th of March and when funding is going to be available on a kind of the whole scale that I think it will need to be available, particularly in the regions, as you said there, in terms of what the downturn may be there. I'm afraid that in the gap, there's going to be an awful lot of businesses who are going to go to the wall. And that's why I think we should be front-loading some of these schemes. Ones that small organisations or small and medium-sized businesses can access without a whole load of bureaucracy. Because I think there's a whole fear there at the moment, while there are some loans stuff and some supports available there. They're not available on the scale that we need them to be available. And then following that, in terms of the derogation from the state aid rules, I think they need to be lifted at this stage, because again, regardless of what type of Brexit we're going to end up with, surely the front loading of those projects would help to mitigate from some of the consequences of Brexit.
I think, Senator, the supplier of, or the provider of the majority of resources in the early days of a disorderly Brexit taking place will have to be the Irish government, because we are the ones that have fundamental responsibility for looking after our economy and for our own citizens. The main area of support we will quickly need from the European Commission would be in relation to policy flexibility that we would need in making that funding available.
Do you think that will be just immediate, like say come the 1st of April, that there will be, are you satisfied that there will be enough policy flexibility there that will protect the small and medium businesses that I'm talking about?
Well, first, from the discussions that I've had with the Commission to date, yes, I believe there is. I believe there's enough intention from them to want to try to support Ireland in the different kinds of challenges that we could face. But in terms of what we would do for SME, I mean, SMEs, we will do all we can, Senator, to make support and help available to different parts of our economy in the light of a disorderly Brexit taking place. But I don't want to understate just how challenging and disruptive that will be. In any Brexit scenario that we are in, or that we could face, it is going to be different to the status quo. And while the government, with support from Europe, will make help and support available, it is still going to be very different from today.
So have you identified the structures, say, by which, say, any funding would actually get to the small and medium businesses? Have you?
Well, I think that I know much of that thinking is going on in the Department of Agriculture at the moment, because they would see the part of our economy that would be first and most severely be affected by that being those who work in our food, and particularly our food export business. And I know they have done a lot of work in this area regarding how that would happen.
So
one of the things
you saying it would come through the Department of Agriculture in that instance in terms of agri-supports?
Well, the main provider of support for any economy hitting a shock like that is going to be the home government in the first place. And what we will need is flexibility from the European Commission in a number of different areas. And yes, it is possible there will be a need for additional further support from them. And as I said, I think the main area in which we're most likely to have to deal with that will be, in particular, food, the export of food.
Yeah, I see what concerns me is, you know yourself, in terms of putting forward, say, a new agricultural scheme or what it might be, it takes months and months to put that in place, and the IT system doesn't always match up, and you have all the checks and balances and everything to be done. So if the structure isn't yet identified on how that is going to be delivered, if it is going to be delivered, then that would really, really concern me. Because
well, all I can do is reassure you at this point, Senator, is that in those kind of circumstances, we would move with all the speed that we can to try to provide support to those who are in difficulty. But again, I want to emphasise that no matter what support that we can supply, a disorderly Brexit will pose a really significant challenge to the Irish economy. That will mean change for all who are affected by it.
And I don't think such thing is an orderly thing. And just on the state aid, I don't know, for infrastructure, yes, Claire, like I won't say any more. But on the state aid, I think projects like the Western Rail Corridor, Knock Airport, and all of those, particularly in the regions, they really have to be front-loaded. And I know you have the National Development Plan and all of that, but we need to see more of an urgency there.
I know capital expenditure for this year alone is up 24% versus a year ago. And I think one of the things that I hope will become clearer with Budget 2019 as we move through the year is the decision to target such a large amount of additional capital expenditure in this year was the right year for the Irish economy.
Okay, thank you, Claire.